So yeah, definitely you might want to keep your Death Necromancer kind of like, I think we clipped through the ground there. What's going on with these flight paths? Nah, let's not do that. You know what I mean? You might want to keep them a bit further away. Hey, what's up, guys? What's up? I wanted to go over the Death Necromancer. So one thing to note about the Death Necromancer, the way their abilities and how they function largely is damage over time. So you're basically just dropping a bunch of dot spells on them or damage over time. Largely, your minions do make the difference as well. Minions are always a large play in Necromancer, but with Death, there's definitely a lot more added effects with damage over time abilities and spells. So you'll find a few of these things to be pretty interesting in their gameplay and some of the mechanics in between time. One thing I want to note is there are ways of basically keeping your damage over time abilities, largely their diseases, keeping them for extended amounts of time, or basically rushing or speeding up the damage over time effects and how long each spell takes and all that. So a lot of it really all adds up. You know, again, I'm not going to go ahead and attack numbers and stuff like that. That's not what I'm looking for in these videos. Just bringing exposure to some of the themes and what's going on. So that's how I'm going to roll with these videos going up. You might see some similar themes in other classes, other specs. I mean, it is what it is. But we're going to go ahead and focus a bit more on what makes Death and Necromancer a bit more different from the other Necromancer specializations. Alright, so with Necromancer Death, it says here that your periodic damage spells now benefit from Spell Haste, and Lich Frost now applies Crit Plague. So Lich Frost, as we all come to know, is our new Putrefy, as we mentioned before. Basically, yeah, this helps you generate more runic power. So with that being said, it now is able to apply Crit Plague. Crit Plague, what it does, it deals 30 plague damage every 3 seconds for 15 seconds, stacking up to 20 times. That's pretty interesting. You have a damage over time effect right off the bat by just generating more runic power. That alone will add a damage over time effect to your damage. The next ability we have here is Noxious Corpse Rot. This does cost 15 runic power. There is a 6-second cooldown on this. But basically, you disease an enemy, reducing their movement speed by 45% and causing 50 to 55 plague damage over 5 seconds. So basically, you get a slow and a damage over time effect. Maybe not the highest damage over time, but definitely you're getting some benefit out of it. So if you throw a few Lich Frosts at the enemy already, you have that with your Crypt Plague along with your Noxious Corpse Rot. So a lot is going on with that. At the end of the duration, the target explodes, dealing 87 plague damage in a 10-yard radius. So yeah, basically there's an explosion of damage, plague damage, that happens right after this ability reaches its duration. The one thing I think just to keep in mind is exactly that. Let this run out. Let this reach to its end before you just place it on again. Unless you're putting it on a different target. But what's going to happen is basically if you extend it, of course you do get the benefit, but it's just pretty awesome to have that cleave or that explosive ability at the end to do additional damage. But you choose how you play. Going forward, you have Plague of Undeath. So this is a 10-second cooldown. You got a 30 runic power cost, and it does have a cast time. Yeah, the other one was instant. Okay. So with Plague of Undeath, you plague an enemy, dealing 51 shadow damage every 2.5 seconds over 20 seconds. When Plague of Undeath is dispelled or expires, the enemy takes 50 shadow damage and is stunned for 4 seconds. So this is more of a single target, I guess, kind of focus once it does end the duration. And the effect that, you know, that you get a stun out of that after that, that's pretty interesting too. So there's a little bit of CC at play there. Not always guaranteed because they might die in mid-process of all this damage over time effects happening. But it's definitely a good bonus to have as a stun being thrown in. But yeah, that's the sample spells that you have for the Death Necromancer. here's a passive one. It's Sludge Belcher, which is pretty disgusting, but reduces the cost of Expunge by 5 and increases its critical strike chance by 3%. Pretty interesting. So basically, your Expunge gets enhanced in this way. A little less cost on runic power, which is always good, and more critical strike chance is always good to have. So some other passives that I figure I'd mention is just a few that I picked here. So one of them being Necrosis. What it states here basically is magic damage dealt now applies Necrosis, increasing the duration of any diseases used against the enemy by 5% for 5 seconds, stacking 5 times. Alright, so basically, Necrosis is the effect that gets added in any other damage that you're doing, mostly magic damage in this case. This will basically extend the duration of your diseases. So remember those abilities that we covered earlier, the ones that basically stun an enemy or does an explosive effect. This is where I say that, well, sometimes that may happen when it reaches the end of its duration. But when you have abilities like this will increase the duration of your diseases. Not exactly a terrible thing. Your game is, you're playing with the tools that you're given here. But if you're counting on those end of duration abilities or effects, it may not always happen. Just to keep that in mind. But overall, this talent basically does a lot to add in because your diseases stay longer, and the longer they stay, basically the longer the damage over time effects will take place. DPS, yeah. The next ability we have is Gravekeeper. So basically, periodic damage has a 10% chance to animate a lesser zombie to aid you in combat for 10 seconds. Can only occur once every 3 seconds. In a lot of ways, this is why you want to have your damage over time abilities to linger for a while, because every time there's damage stats ticking, there's a chance maybe some additional effects like this one may kick in. So Gravekeeper gives you a lesser zombie, and that could occur only once every 3 seconds, but nonetheless, the more damage over time abilities that you got rolling in, the more lesser zombies you'll be having also doing damage, and each one lasts 10 seconds. So you can only imagine, you saw the animation Necromancer, for those of you who haven't, basically having a lesser zombie attack your enemy on top of everything else. It all just really adds up. The next talent that we got is Plague Science. It says here, using Expunge on a target affected by Plague of Undeath spreads it up to one nearby enemy and deals an additional 120 plague damage. So you get basically a burst of damage, and it spreads it to a nearby enemy. So I guess my comment would be on this one is just that this further expands more AoE, more ticking damage, more diseases being spread. Largely, you are exactly as it says. You are a disease-ridden, good-for-nothing, unhealthy Death Necromancer. I mean, that really is the truth. You're basically a hazard to most enemies at bare minimum. So yeah, that's my opinion of Plague Science. So basically, Death Necromancer in general, just many opportunities to spread more plagues, more damage over time abilities, more diseases, and basically that's basically your job. Coming up next, we got a video just covering some of the active talents that you find within the talent tree. So we'll be going over those shortly, and I hope you guys enjoy. So guys, as we go through the talent tree for Death Necromancer, I thought I'd just mention a few things. Going off right off the bat, you're going to start with Noxious Corpse Rot right here on the Necromancer side. We already read that, but just letting you know. So it'll start you off on this side of the tree, but you could go ahead and select how you want. This is my current build, what I have right now for Death Necromancer, and I'll just go over a few of the beginning talents that you start off with over here. So, Expunge is your first ability that you do get. This is where, yeah, your diseases, although they're widespread already, that's basically going to be the key thing here. You blast a diseased enemy for 22 plague damage plus 4 over 4 seconds, stacking 3 times. Can only target diseased enemies. So you're already placing diseases on enemies already with your Lich Frost. With, what is it? I believe it's Crypt Plague. Yeah, Crypt Plague. So Crypt Plague is already coming from your Lich Frost. So this ability will already benefit you by impacting that. let alone the other diseases that you're dropping on your enemies. Going forward, we do have Plague of Undeath. We did read this earlier, but this is basically a stun that happens at the end of it if you reach the end of this duration, which is pretty nifty to have. I don't know how often it will happen. It's just it varies per match. There's too much different variables that play with that, so it's just pretty interesting to know that should someone dispel, or I guess somehow in game, there's a unit that dispels your diseases, that unit will get stunned. So that's pretty interesting right there. And then the other ability that we have here is the Flesh to Worms ability. Although as gross as a lot of these abilities do sound, it does make sense. They are diseases, and this is a Death Necromancer at the end of the day. So you disease an enemy, another disease, dealing 26 shadow damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. So this is your basic damage over time ability. Very handy in many situations. It's just something to keep the numbers ticking. And that's basically what you work with, is damage over time, just damage overall. And this is many cases, as you can see, there's no cooldown on this. You could spam this across, fields of enemies, especially in dungeons and stuff. You'll just have numbers ticking throughout the matches. So our next talent that we got here is called Raise Ghost. This costs 204 mana. I guess the mana will vary. The mana values always vary anyways. But it says here, you raise a ghost to aid you in combat, occupying 2 life force. While active, shadow and nature damage dealt by all party and raid members is increased by 2%. Does not stack with similar effects. So along with every raise spell, which is basically your summoning spell, if you will, each raise spell comes along with a command spell. So in this case, this one is called Command Ghost, and the effect is command your ghost to cause your Harvest Plague to tick 20% faster for 14 seconds. Usable while casting or channeling. So one of the benefits of this is the command spell will help you, regain some health that you might have lost while in combat. So this is a good, somewhat you would say, like a fast forward button for the HP gained by Harvest Plague. Pretty interesting on that. So one thing to add in on the screen here, we got Harvest Plague. So Harvest Plague is another active talent, which basically is an instant cast. There's a 12-second cooldown. Its description: the yellow text reads as Plague the enemy, siphoning 35 health every 2 seconds for 14 seconds, healing for 100% of the amount drained. So we have the next talent, which is Virulency. If I'm saying that right, it's instant cast. It's 1 minute cooldown, and the yellow text says refreshes all Necromancer diseases on the target enemy. So this is definitely pretty good to have when maybe you have a lot of spells on cooldown, or you're running, so to speak, as you're moving around. At least you keep the diseases rolling around with the damage and just having their ticking effects take place against your enemy. So definitely pretty good to have, just in pretty much in most situations. I definitely wouldn't use this if you just casted a disease. This is something that you would put probably in the center point or near the end. But that's a decision you have to make based on the other diseases and also the final duration effects of different diseases, as we mentioned earlier. Hey guys, so just want to leave a few opinions when it comes to the Death Necromancer. One thing starting off is basically the level of control you have over your damage over time effects and also its durations. So something like Virulency and the command spell for your Raise Ghost ability. Those two abilities alone could do quite a number of damage and also sustain you in the same time. So, it's just there's a lot of different mechanics involved as you level up and as you select the talents that you find best fit. So, I mean, you got multiple options as far as extending the duration, rushing the duration, making it go faster. A combination of both. I mean, that's just something definitely to see as you play and sample around with the Death Necromancer. But Death Necromancer, basically, it's the slow over time killing effect. That's largely the theme here. I would believe that Death Necromancer is definitely on point when it comes to, that just its specialization expression, if you will. So it definitely fits the Necromancer class. It's pretty interesting how the talents complement each other. So those are my thoughts, along with a few other things. And so the emphasis on the Death Necromancer is largely your diseases. 9 times out of 10. I think you have like only one magic effect, depending on what active ability you select. I believe that is Harvest Plague, but I believe that's considered a magic effect. I could be wrong on that, but one of them are a magic effect. But basically, the more focus on diseases that you are with your Death Necromancer, the larger amount of damage that your target will take over time, along with all the other passives that kind of interconnect with a lot of the actives. So there's definitely a lot of different outcomes on how your opponent will die. Will you die by your minion, diseases, direct damage spells? So there's a lot of different variations of damage and where they're coming from. So yeah, I just find it interesting together how the passive talents happen to complement and enhance each of the other active talents. So yeah, those are just my thoughts when it comes to the Necromancer, but there's a few other things I'll just go ahead and mention. So for those who are relatively new with damage over time classes, yeah, this would be just kind of like the idea, when you're on target A, B, or C, or whichever target you're focusing on first, just maximize as much of your damage over time spells on one and then switch to another. So the idea more or less is you stack enough damage over time abilities on one target and then have your minions pretty much do the rest, and then you could start stacking the rest of your damage over time abilities on a secondary target, and then just redirect your minions as you see fit. You could definitely do that however you choose. That probably goes without saying for those of us who are senior, but then for those of you who are relatively new to WoW in general or COA, that would probably be the best rule of thumb. Have your minions focused on the person that has the most damage over time, and then just stack damage over time on alternative targets, and then just redirect your minions in between pools. So one thing I just wanted to acknowledge is that when applying Plague of Undeath to an enemy, what would happen is if someone was to dispel that, chances are it's probably going to be a PvP probably mechanic, but it may also be a mechanic with NPCs depending on the difficulties. I'm not sure how the higher difficulties are on Ascension in particular, but the fact is if Plague of Undeath is dispelled, whoever is the dispeller, just to clarify, that target will be basically stunned. Otherwise, Plague of Undeath will continue rolling its ticking damage as you cast it. So at the time of recording, I did notice a few things as I was leveling up. Some of them from the talents largely, because those do give us some active, unique talents. So one I would mention as we looked over earlier was the Raise Ghost spell, which seems to be an exclusive for Death Necromancers. Now what I noticed though is that it's found in the animation tree in the spell book. That's just one thing, but really the bigger thing is that it draws a lot of aggro when under Undead Protect status. So I guess I should say stance in that case, but technically the stance is doing its job. But if you have a warrior, a skeletal warrior, it's not really going to hold aggro as much as compared to the ghost. And the ghost does consume 2 life force, so you're really going to be stranded with 2 minions unless you switch it up. But again, that's where you just put in probably damage stance to remedy that. But again, if you don't want aggro on you, you may have to deal with raising a few ghosts in between fights or so. My suggestion maybe, or just thoughts maybe, if it has a passive kind of defensive ability where like maybe a passive, a chance of dodging hit or so, because at the end of the day it's a ghost, so you could let your imagination fly with that and just give it maybe a 10% chance that maybe opponents will miss when they strike at your ghost minion. That's just an opinion. It doesn't have to be 10%, but that's just like something random as an example to throw out there to prolong the use of your raise spell. Alright guys, so that's pretty much my thoughts and opinions, but what are your thoughts and opinions? Please drop them in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe this is the first type of theme that you've seen in COA that has this type of gameplay. Of the Death Necromancer, do you prefer the animation Necromancer? The next one is going to be Rhyme Necromancer, so I'll be working on that one soon. I was going to say Nextromancer. Wow. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. This is definitely a different gameplay style compared to animation for sure. A little less emphasis on summons and a lot more emphasis on diseases. Up next we have the active talents demonstration, so I'll go ahead and be showing some of these spells that we did talk about a little earlier. Some of them we didn't cover yet, but I do hope you guys enjoy. And right now we're going to go ahead and roll over to the active talents demonstration. Thank you again for sticking around. Best wishes. Take care. God bless. See you on the other side, guys.